NATO says it is prepared for any Iranian threat in Europe, but the warning follows a report that Tehran may be considering strikes on U.S. military targets located on European soil if Washington escalates the war. The Financial Times reports that Iranian officials have discussed possible targets in southeastern Europe, including American-linked facilities in Bulgaria and Cyprus. The report describes contingency planning reportedly linked to the possibility of a renewed U.S. offensive against Iran. One facility mentioned is Bulgaria's Bezmir Air Base, which reportedly approved the use of its runway and infrastructure for U.S. refueling aircraft. Cyprus was also reportedly considered because of its British military bases and its importance to Western air operations across the Eastern Mediterranean. The alleged targets are not necessarily European cities or civilian infrastructure. They are U.S. and allied military facilities that could support American strikes, logistics, or surveillance operations against Iran. NATO responded by saying the alliance is ready to address any threat and will do whatever is necessary to defend all member states. A NATO official pointed to 4 earlier occasions when alliance air defenses intercepted ballistic missiles heading toward Turkey from Iran. NATO says those interceptions demonstrate that its deterrence and defense posture remains strong and effective. The more difficult question is why Europe is being pulled into the conflict at all. Washington is using military facilities, refueling sites, and transit routes across allied countries to maintain pressure on Iran. From Tehran's perspective, those facilities are not neutral infrastructure if they help sustain American operations. That creates a serious dilemma for European governments. If the United States escalates from European facilities, European governments may discover that they are not merely hosting American power. They are inheriting the consequences of American policy.
Iran may be preparing to take the fight beyond the Middle East, and NATO might be the next target on its hit list. The Islamic Republic is currently mulling over potentially bombarding U.S. military assets in Europe if Donald Trump orders a renewed escalation against Tehran, FT reported. According to the Financial Times, Iranian planners have explored options for striking American military facilities in southeastern Europe, including in Bulgaria. The report cites people close to the Iranian regime who say Tehran is assessing how far it could widen the conflict if the U.S. launches another major offensive. One location reportedly under consideration is Bulgaria's Bezmir Air Base. Sofia recently authorized U.S. refueling aircraft to operate from the facility, potentially increasing its strategic importance to Washington. Cyprus has also reportedly been considered. The island hosts British military facilities, and one of those sites was targeted by a drone earlier this year. But Iran's contingency planning may go beyond military bases. The Financial Times reports that Iranian planners have also examined ways to disrupt subsea fiber optic cables running through the Strait of Hormuz. These cables carry critical communications traffic, meaning any serious damage could create disruption well beyond the battlefield. The bigger picture here is important. Iran is reportedly looking at ways to raise the costs for Washington if the conflict expands. One person familiar with the discussions told the FT that Iran was developing options to widen the conflict if Trump followed through on previous threats to strike Iranian infrastructure in response to attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Another source said Iran could extend its retaliation beyond the Middle East if it faced a major new U.S. offensive. That does not mean an attack on European bases is imminent. The sources stressed that the scale and nature of any Iranian response would depend on what the United States actually does. But the reported planning sends a clear warning. If Washington expands the conflict, Tehran may look for pressure points far beyond Iran and the Persian Gulf, potentially turning U.S. and allied facilities in Europe, as well as critical undersea infrastructure, into part of the wider confrontation. And that could transform a regional war into a much broader international crisis.
Well, the current U.S. President, Donald Trump, has specific characteristics, including being very short-sighted, meaning he exhibits childlike behavior. There is no foresight in his statements. We don't rely on his words at all. I can rely on my driver's words way more than his, because he will come exactly at the time he promised. But he keeps saying things that are proven void by the next day. Don't rely on his words. I believe that the media should also not pay so much attention to the words of the current President of the United States, because he speaks nonsense. Well, the current U.S. President, Donald Trump, has specific characteristics, including being very short-sighted, meaning he exhibits childlike behavior. There is no foresight in his statements. When he speaks, he doesn't even think about, for example, 24 hours later. A major international leader should see the depth of his words, even 50 or 100 years ahead, knowing that history records them. However, his characteristic is that he cannot even predict tomorrow, nor say something measured and forward-looking. His words have no foundation or rules. His statements have destroyed American power. We don't rely on his Trump words at all. I can rely on my driver's words way more than his, because he will come exactly at the time he promised. But he keeps saying things that are proven void by the next day. Don't rely on his words. I believe that the media should also not pay so much attention to the words of the current President of the United States, because he speaks nonsense. Every war has a goal, and that goal is stated by the one who started it. That what am I going to do? Victory can only be achieved, and success can only be claimed when the one who set that goal has actually reached it. The United States government announced two main goals in this war: to overthrow the Iranian government and to partition Iran. Those were their primary objectives. They failed right from the start. They had a very short-sighted vision based on the characteristics I mentioned earlier. They thought that within 3 or 4 days, for instance, they could overthrow the Iranian government or partition Iran. Clearly, it was a highly illusory notion. Not only were they unsuccessful, but after those two goals failed, their war became devoid of strategy, meaning they had no other plan. From the beginning, they drew a plan to overthrow and partition. They had no other plan. When those two goals failed, a strategy-less war began, where every few days, in meetings held at the White House and within their defense system, they would exchange some words, make a new decision, and announce it. They announced at least 12 decisions. For example, they said, "We will take Karg Island," and began very intense bombing, hundreds of bombs, very heavy bombardments on a small island, but they couldn't even land a single person there. They said, "We will occupy Iran's islands." They couldn't. "We want to advance into Iranian soil." They couldn't. "We will open the Strait of Hormuz. We will conduct a liberation operation." They brought their carriers with great noise and fanfare, and the U.S. President issued a statement. They could do nothing. Now, where is it? The Strait of Hormuz is still there. Let's see if the U.S. can bring one person into the Strait of Hormuz and shows us. Given there are so many media outlets in the world, let's see if they can show one American in the Strait of Hormuz. Meaning, out of the 12 goals they announced, the list of which is clear, where they said something new every 5 or 6 days, they failed in all of them. They couldn't establish themselves. Therefore, they cannot talk about success at all. America absolutely cannot say a word about any success. One of their goals, for example, was to crush Iran's nuclear energy infrastructure, but they couldn't. The Strait of Hormuz will never lose its importance. This is a production site for oil and gas, meaning the Gulf itself is the production site for oil and gas. Whatever happens here, regardless of where they want to take it, oil, it is produced here, meaning it is under control. This is the production site. Oil wells cannot be moved elsewhere. At most, they load it onto ships or use pipelines to take it somewhere else. Well, that pipeline is again under control, meaning it is susceptible to damage.